Hello and welcome to People in Power. I'm Hamish McDonald. On today's programme, fighting for a God.
Donno sanpatti ଅଛି se kaina pina ସବୁ ଅଛି इटी पत्थर नेले आमे केमति ग्रो बचु पत्थर तिले का आमे को पिला जिले का आमे बची पारबु डंगर पहाड़ सब बची पारबु वर्षा आसबो से पवन आसबो शीत आसबो सब तासबास हेबो ए पत्थर सब को पानी नेले आमे मरि जिबु.
In July, we brought you the story of the Niyamgiri mountain range in the Indian state of Orissa, which is seen by the Kondh people that live there as a god that provides them with everything they need. But the Niyamgiri range also contains huge deposits of bauxite or aluminium ore, which Vedanta, a British-based mining corporation, wants to extract to feed its nearby refinery. The Kondh say that any such mining will mean that they lose their god and therefore their identity. And in recent years, they've won widespread support for their campaign to stop the development. Well, now we can report that another major NGO has joined organisations such as Survival International and Action Aid in the fight to save the Niyamgiri. Amnesty International has just published a report which criticises Vedanta and the state government of Orissa for ignoring the needs of the Kondh people. Amnesty says that people are living in the shadow of a massive refinery, breathing polluted air and afraid to drink from and bathe in a river that's one of the main sources of water in the region. It is shocking, they say, how those who are most affected by the project have been provided with the least information. We'll hear more about that report later, but first here's Sapna Bhatia's film, first screened in July 2009, on the battle to save a god.
नियमराज हेला अमर देवी को आमे पूजा करूछ वेदांत असुरु सेटा कने देशर असुरु आसी करी हमके मरबार पई आसी जो आ नियमगिरी पहाड़ चाडी देला बोले आमे मरि जबो.
The Niyamgiri Hills are many things to many people. To environmentalists, they are an important nature reserve, home to endangered species such as wild elephant, tiger and leopard. To the Kondh people who live here, they are a source of life itself.
सबु हमर पाहापुर सबु बुलिछि हमर डंगर एबे भी देखे देबी स्वल्प कचो अछि स्वल्प कचर पेट पुरुछि आमे दुमा हेउछि कोंदा कदली तिले सेट दुमा होइछि.
But the hills are also rich in bauxite, the raw material needed to make aluminium. And that's what brought Vedanta, a British-based mining company, to the Niyamgiri. Vedanta is one of the world's largest mining companies, a giant multinational with over $8 billion in annual revenue and operations in India, Africa and Australia. In 2003, it formed a joint venture with the state government of Orissa to exploit the bauxite deposits in and around Niyamgiri. The deal sparked a David and Goliath battle. On the one side, and indigenous people desperate to save their ancestral lands. On the other, a multi-billion-dollar international business.
ए पहाड़ नेबा पई बोले ए पत्थर सब नेबा पई से एको पानी चांचे दोनो संपत्ति अछि से काइना पिना सब अछि इटी पत्थर नेले आमे केमति ग्रो बचु पत्थर तिले का आमे को पिला जिले का आमे बची पारबु डंगर पहाड़ सब बची पारबु वर्षा आसबो से पवन आसबो शीत आसबो सब तासबास हेबो ए पत्थर सब को पानी नेले आमे मरि जिबु.
Kumti Majhi is an elder of the Kondh. He has lived his whole life in the Niyamgiri.
जी आमर तीन पेड़ हैला ना आमर अजा आमर बाफा तापरे आमे.
In 2003, Kumti realized that his god, Niyamgiri, was in trouble.
आमके सपन भी देला ई जो बाहर जो सरकार बाहर को पानी जेते बेले सरकार बिकला के ई बाहर को पानी जेते बेले आसी करे इते आक्रमण कला के ई पहाड़टा देया हेबो नै से फास्ट रो आमे माटी पूजा जो दिन हैला से दिन उठो आमे ई आंदोलन भी आरंभ करिचु सेति लागि सेनु आमके सपन भी देला जे नियमगिरी ए बोलिया मते विपदटा आसुची तापर कान करबो ई पूजाटा भी आरंभ करलु समस्त भी चेतना हेलु मां के जनता करी आमे रखबा आमर लड़ाई करी करे आमे आमर जीवन आगे जीवा से ना किंतु मार जीवन जीवा नहीं.
the Kondh mobilized in defense of their ancestral home, often forming human chains of protest, kilometers long. But it quickly became clear their demonstrations were in vain. Within months of the 2003 agreement, Vedanta and the government of Orissa began work on the first stage of the mining project, this $1 billion alumina refinery in Lanjigarh, on the margins of the Kondh's ancestral lands. In the process, over 100 households were displaced, in some cases by force, the Kondh allege, and brought here to a community purpose-built by Vedanta.
नहीं आम गाँ तो छाड़ी कर नहीं जाऊ बोली बहुत कांडा है तथापि ढलार गुंडागिरी गुंडा बने लागी कर से तो जबरदस्ती रे सेटा पुलिस लागी कर से मन के उठे बार व्यवस्था कले बोली जो राती राती केते लोग आम घर छाड़ी कर गाँ छाड़ी कर नहीं जाऊ बोली करी जेते बेले कहला के जबरदस्ती राती राती बुल्ली जोर लोगे कर घर मने भंगा
आमे ई कंपनी जमी रे जमी आमे हरई करी एते असुविधा हेउचु नाई कुइले सरी ने.
But for others, the response was more positive.
अरे बसा हेचु बोल भल लागबो ना कि 6 वर्ष 7 वर्ष तिला लोक भल लागबो ना कि इंदी तो थिबाटा खाइबार पीबार सब तो सुविधा लागुची.
The refinery for which the villagers were displaced is designed to turn the bauxite found under the Niyamgiri into aluminum, the fine white oxide of aluminium required for smelting the metal. The Kondh and their lawyers say its construction is illegal. Under Indian law, access to the bauxite reserves of the Niyamgiri should have been approved before building of the refinery began.
The law is very clear in respect of this, where the Forest Conservation Act and the guidelines which have been issued, under it says that if a project involves forest land as well as non-forest land, you see there can be projects which involve forest as well as non-forest. Work should not start in the non-forest area also till you get approval for the forest land.
It's a charge Vedanta's chief operating officer in India strongly rejects.
Every industry, if you see, some pre-project activities like survey is done, baseline data collection is done. Most of the project has started only in 2004, towards end of 2004, I can say.
So before 2004, is it fair to say that there was no construction activity?
No, nothing was going on.
But Vedanta's own records show construction began even before approval for the refinery site itself had been granted.
They got the environment clearance towards the end of 2004. And in fact, they had started work in 2003 itself, because that has been disclosed in their audited accounts.
Bishwajit Mohanty is an environmentalist with a long association with the Niyamgiri and the Kondh.
I was the first petitioner in the Vedanta case on 6th of November 2004.
In response to petitions by Bishwajit Mohanty and others, India's Supreme Court asked its Central Empowered Committee, or the CEC, to investigate the tangle of claim and counterclaim surrounding construction of the refinery and the related proposal to mine the Niyamgiri hills. The CEC recommended that the environment clearance granted for the refinery should be revoked, saying the use of the forest land in an ecologically sensitive area like the Niyamgiri hills should not be permitted. The casual approach, the lackadaisical manner, and the haste with which the entire issue of forest and environmental clearance for the alumina refinery project has been dealt with smacks of undue favor, leniency, and does not inspire confidence with regard to the willingness and resolve of both the state government and the Ministry of Environment and Forests to deal with such matters.
The maker of the law turns into the breaker of the law because he's always looking for loopholes on how to exploit. So we don't have a good land use policy in this country. We can end up giving a mining license or a prospecting license even within a protected area.
Valmik Thapar is a lifelong campaigner for Indian environmental causes. He served on the CEC when it was investigating Niyamgiri.
I still believe the Ministry of Environment and Forests in India requires urgent reform. To me, it's not serving the purpose of the environment, the purpose of the forests. It's still a clearinghouse for permissions. It still deals with projects which are fait accompli, where a factory is created without the clearance for the raw material. So because you've spent 50 crores creating a factory, you put pressure on the government to give you a license to mine or get the raw material to feed that factory. This is not how you can save India's environment.
And neither the clear objections of the Indian Supreme Court's own expert committee, the Kondh's protest, nor those of environmentalists had any effect on Vedanta. Construction work on the refinery went on, and the company continued to maintain that the Niyamgiri's fragile ecosystem would be unaffected by its mining plans.
There will not be any damage to the hill. Only localized pockets of bauxites are there where we will be taking out the bauxite. If you see from the outside it will appear as the same hill.
In the face of such reasoning, Kumti Majhi, the elder whose dreams had first raised the alert on Vedanta's plans, decided to leave the Niyamgiri for the first time in his life and head to India's capital, Delhi.
Delhi शहर रे जेन होटल के गला बेले देखला बेल के लोग बोलुसु कि पेचा खुला हे करी के जेन बोलिया तार ऊपर लदा लुटी हे करी से भात जीवन बचेबा लागि भात छिनी खाय वाला आमे निरोगी खाद्य खाई निरोगी रे तिलु होटल रे जो खाद्य आर बटाटिका जेन बासना शहर जगह रे एटा मैंने आमके पसंद नहीं.
Despite his disdain for the capital, Kumti and his companions met decision makers and lawyers all over Delhi seeking support.
बहुत जगह के आमे बुली करी मदे नियमगिरी विषय जुनी इटा जणैछु.
At the same time, international NGOs like Survival International and ActionAid also sought to draw attention to the Kondh's campaign.
Kumti is an incredibly passionate individual, and why wouldn't he be? Kumti is facing the loss of his sacred space. He's facing the loss of perhaps even his way of life.
Meredith Alexander works for ActionAid, a London-based NGO, which took an unusual approach to raise awareness on behalf of the Kondh, releasing this image in English newspapers.
The Kondh are in a situation where their sacred site, Niyamgiri Mountain, might be destroyed for an aluminium mine. What we wanted to do was help people in the UK understand what that might feel like. We felt that St. Paul's is one of the iconic sacred sites here in the UK. It's not sacred for everybody, but for a large percentage of the population it is sacred. And it's also iconic. Everyone knows the St. Paul Dome in London. It's a key part of the skyline. And so we wanted people to really understand what it would be like to have such an important location destroyed for a mine. So what we did was we applied to the London City Council to demolish the cathedral and dig a mine underneath it.
In 2007, ActionAid went further, buying shares in Vedanta on the Kondh's behalf to give them access to the company's annual general meeting in London. It was time for Kumti to travel again.
लंडन में जीवा से उड़ाजहाज रे बसी कर जेन गोली जीवा गोली जे उड़ाजहाज बसवाटा टिके ऊपर उड़वाटा टिके केबे नाही बसला सेटा टिके गुटे शांति मिलला किंतु उलेला परे सेति जो बोलिया देश माटी को आड़े देखले भी माटी नाही कि जंगल नाही पहाड़ नाही किछि नाही तांकर घर मैंने देखले टिके बड़ बड़ बिल्डिंग कर
In the meeting, Kumti stood up to ask a question of the chairman, and the way he phrased it and the strength and the power behind his concern really stood out, not just to the chairman, but to the other shareholders. And we found that actually, not just Kumti, but other people in the room started to ask questions about this mine in Orissa.
The chairperson of Vedanta is Anil Agarwal, a self-made multi-billionaire who started as a scrap metal collector in Mumbai. He presided over the meeting.
मार एड़े पड़ बुझेटा के तु बुष्ट करवा लगाइछि तते देखबी एंता कहला हेति लागि मुई कहली जे मते देख तुई केबे देखि नतिबु तोर देश काइछि देख तते भी देखबा लागि नियमगिरी अछन.
Following Kumti's appearance at the AGM, an Edinburgh-based fund got rid of almost $3.5 million in Vedanta shares. Norway's National Bank also shed $13 million worth of Vedanta shares following its own investigation into Vedanta's projects in India, including the Niyamgiri proposal. The bank's report stated, the allegations leveled at the company regarding environmental damage and complicity in human rights violations, including abuse and forced eviction of tribal peoples, are well-founded. The company seems to be lacking the interest and will to do anything about the severe and lasting damage that its activities inflict on people and the environment.
If you see from the Norway government side, it was not only on the human right issues. So they have raised so many issues. In this part, when we have set up this refinery, not even a single case has been lodged against Vedanta for any human right violation.
So as the Norwegian government official has put, there are no unethical practices, no human rights violations, and nothing you can say on record so far?
Let me tell you one thing. Some people believe why we have given the name Vedanta. And people must know, once people are using the name Vedanta, Vedanta is not a name. Vedanta is a philosophy for joining all religion together. Vedanta is a philosophy for creating all people together. Vedanta is a wave for ensuring development of the area as well as development of the nations.
We invited Vedanta's head office to provide further comment. They provided this statement. Vedanta absolutely denies any allegations of forcible or unlawful eviction. We have worked with the state authorities, local NGOs, and the communities in the area to ensure that our activities are conducted as sensitively as possible. The project has introduced provision of healthcare and educational facilities where previously little or none existed, and generated much needed economic investment and employment. We are determined to ensure that the project benefits all of its stakeholders. Late that same year, the Indian Supreme Court appeared to rule against Vedanta and its joint venture with the government of Orissa. But extraordinarily, in the same judgment, the court invited a firm called Sterlite Industries, or SIIL, to resubmit the mining proposal within 8 weeks. Sterlite Industries is a subsidiary of Vedanta. In fact, its own website describes it as the principal subsidiary of the Vedanta Resources Group. The Supreme Court also gave Sterlite very clear guidance as to what would be needed for the application to succeed. Only one of these conditions referred to the Kondh's interests, namely that 5% of the project's profits be reinvested back into conservation and tribal development. In August 2008, the Supreme Court approved the Sterlite's proposal to mine the Niyamgiri Hills, only subject to a further environmental clearance, which was granted in May. The recommendations of its own Central Empowered Committee seem to count for nothing.
Here the irony is that Central Empowered Committee is a baby of the Supreme Court. So that is something which is a matter for us, which left us pondering that why did the Supreme Court ignore this report given by its own body, which is very qualified, which has got absolutely independent and impartial experts working there.
I think that anyone who sets up an infrastructure for a mining operation or a river valley project or a big industry knows that he can find a path to getting permission, because the rationale for giving permission is India is an emerging economy. It's growing at whatever 7% or 6%, and development is the need of the day. This is how every politician talks: generate more money, give more jobs. But this to me is brainless chatter. This must end, because there has to be something more important than just development. And that's how you keep your natural resource base intact for a future India.
Looking into all the positions and what development has taken place in last 60 years, that's why they have taken a decision. Yes, Supreme Court cannot keep the eyes closed, and we cannot say that these people should continue to live like this, what they were living 100 years back. They also have right to live a better life.
विकास बोले काना विकास गाड़ी मोटर उड़ाजाहाज बसले विकास हाँ आमके सेटा दरकार नहीं.
Following its victory in the bid to mine the Niyamgiri, Vedanta has now applied to extend its refinery site 6-fold. So does this mean that the fight to save the Niyamgiri Hills is over and that the Kondh have lost their sacred lands? It seems not.
Vedanga amaro Niyamgiri pahado सुइबो का दरकार नहीं. हमर बैंक गले भी मुंडो गले भी मुचाड़े बने से पारले सरी हमें पारले
सुप्रीम कोर्ट देले कि पार्लियामेंट देले भी से फाय नहीं. हमें लड़े जो चली ची आर अवधि आग को बढ़वा तांके मरबे हमें भी मरबू खाली हमें तो मारबू बोल बटन नहीं तांके भी मरबे हमें भी मरबू
আকি পবিত্র হইলা রে মোহর গিরি শৃঙ্গ কেড়ে সবাদি সুচি
For Vedanta, the fight may be over, but for the Kondh, the fight has just begun.
Sapna Bhatia asked India's Ministry of Environment and Forests to comment on its granting of the mining licence to Vedanta's Sterlite Industries and the government of Orissa. The response was no comment. We also offered Vedanta another opportunity to discuss some of these issues, but at the time of recording, they hadn't come back to us. Well, joining me now is Meghna Abraham from Amnesty International. Thanks very much for coming in. So far, a lot of the criticism has been of Vedanta, but since you've begun participating in this debate, you've pointed the finger at the government as well. Who do you think really is responsible?
Well, we think the government has the primary responsibility because under international law, it is the government that has the responsibility to protect people from actions of companies and other actors that would lead to infringements of their human rights. But there's also obviously the responsibility of Vedanta as a company. At the very least, there is an acceptance now that companies should ensure that their operations respect human rights and don't lead to human rights abuses. So I think they both have responsibilities in this context, and that's what we've tried to identify in our report.
Your report seems to focus on preventing expansion of the refinery, but you also identify very acute problems to do with access to water. Why aren't you wanting that to be fixed first and then dealing with the issue of expansion?
We actually think that both things need to happen. The problem is basically that there is a proposal that the company has made for a 6-fold expansion of the refinery, and that's pending before the government. If that goes ahead, it's going to greatly magnify the risks that the communities are already experiencing. So we're asking for both things. A, that the immediate issues in terms of pollution and access to water and health monitoring go ahead, but at the same time that there's no expansion till these concerns are addressed, because otherwise it's going to become a much more difficult situation for the community.
We saw in that film reference to companies, investment groups pulling out of their shares in Vedanta. We know that the Church of England has now divested its interests. Do you think they've been too late in doing that?
I'm afraid we really can't sort of comment on. Each organisation will take its sort of time in terms of its engagement with the company to decide at what stake it feels that's a step that it needs to take. We do think it's a very welcome step, that it's a strong signal that they have sent to the company that they're taking the human rights concerns from the ground very seriously.
Vedanta has responded to your report, essentially saying that they offered you the opportunity to engage, but that you hadn't accepted that offer. In fact, you'd rejected it. What's your response to that?
I'm afraid that's just simply not true. We actually interviewed Vedanta Aluminium, the subsidiary in Orissa, as part of our research process to give them a chance to go through all the allegations and others that we had against them. Since we've come back, we've actually sent a summary of our findings to the company, given them a chance to comment. We've sent them drafts of the report, we've asked for meetings, and we've had no response till just a few days before our report was released, where they suggested a meeting, and we've agreed to that. So they've had plenty of opportunities actually from us to be able to engage with us, and they've only chosen to even set up an offer just very, very soon to the time the report was going to be offered.
Meghna Abraham from Amnesty International, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this edition of People and Power. If you'd like to comment on our report or anything else for that matter, we'd love to hear from you. The address, aljazeera.net/English. Until next time, thanks for watching.